from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Troubles in Boyle Heights on the 60 westbound before the 5 with a wreck in the right lane. Several vehicles involved there and traffic's jamming up at Downey Road. 710 northbound drive is stopped from Atlantic Bandini up to 3rd Street. And in Carson, 405 northbound at Main Street, a work zone has the off-ramp closed. Traffic's jamming up from Carson Street.
Bank of America has powerful digital solutions for local and global businesses, so you can make every move matter. Visit bankofamerica.com/banking for business to learn more. Bank of America, N.A. Copyright 2023.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
Chris Eubanks has two very important distinctions attached to his name. He's only the third Black American male tennis player to reach the quarterfinals at Wimbledon. He's also the only American male left on the Wimbledon bracket. Eubanks, who grew up in Atlanta, continues his push towards history tonight. He faces Daniil Medvedev of Russia in the quarterfinals. Only two other Black American males made it to the Wimbledon quarterfinals. The legendary Arthur Ashe did it in 1968, 1969, and 1975. Malavi Washington made it in 1996. The Dodgers will have three starters in tonight's Major League Baseball All-Star game in Seattle. Right fielder Mookie Betts, first baseman Freddie Freeman, and designated hitter J.D. Martinez. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 is dedicated to empowering our communities by providing progressive talk radio for our audience. We strive to be an intersectional voice for the voiceless. As a Black-owned and operated station, we are committed to highlighting diverse perspectives and creating safe spaces for meaningful dialogue. We believe that everyone has something unique to bring to these political, economic, social, and cultural conversations, and we don't shy away from the hard conversations about current events. We endeavor to be a beacon of hope and understanding, while boldly challenging listeners to think more deeply about difficult topics that impact us all. With this in mind, our mission statement at KBLA Talk 1580 is simple: to create an inclusive platform that promotes civil discourse through honest dialogue and encourages personal growth among our listeners, so they can become the active agents of change. Our vision is to establish ourselves as the premier radio network with relevant programming across the beloved community, connecting people through shared experiences and collective power for lasting impact beyond these challenging times.
Train a-comin'. You don't need no baggage, you just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the dealers humming. Don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord.
I'm Tavis Smiley. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Our phone number, 1-800-920-1580, 1-800-920-1580. Delighted that you are with us in this final hour of today's program. And in this hour, the next battle over color blindness has begun, so says University of Chicago law professor Sonja B. Starr, who authored a provocative piece for the New York Times yesterday. But we'll talk to her today, in fact, right now, about the next battle over color blindness already underway. Professor Starr, good to have you on this program. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's my great delight to have you. Glad we have an hour. There's a whole lot to unpack in this hour, and so I'm glad we got some time to work our way through it. Let me start with this. I want to get your critique. I want to start with your critique of this notion of color blindness. And I say notion of color blindness for two reasons. Number one, because I don't believe there is anything. There's no such thing as color blindness, number one. That's my own assessment, and you're the author of the piece, so we'll let you have your say. So one, I don't believe there is such a thing as color blindness, so I call it the notion of color blindness. And secondly, I remind this audience from time to time, when these conversations come up, that nowhere in Dr. King's work or writings would you ever hear the word colorblindness. For what that's worth, take it, but you will never hear or find anywhere in King's work this notion of color blindness. I digress on that point, but I want to commence, as I said a moment ago, with your critique of the notion of color blindness, and we'll jump from there.
Yeah, great. So I want to start by I want to take this in two parts,
okay.
right? So one is the general idea of color blindness and the role that it's played already in developing, like, the Supreme Court's law on equal protection, the way it influences American law. And that itself has been critiqued by many scholars, including me, in other writing. Then I want to focus on the next stage of the battle over colorblindness, in which the concept is really being pushed even further, and that's the thing that my New York Times piece that you mentioned focuses on. Mm-hmm. So the general idea of in the law of colorblindness is a very contested concept, and the idea is that essentially it's sort of a rereading of what cases like Brown v. Board of Education stood for, right? With the idea that they stand for the idea that the government can never make any racial distinctions between people, no matter what the purpose is, right? Whether the purpose is to expand racial inequality versus to close racial gaps, that we should think about governmental use of race as always being bad, regardless of its purpose, right? So that's the general idea of colorblindness. There's also this kind of background, like, metaphorical idea of colorblindness. This idea that government literally should be blind to race, right? Should not see race. And you're right, of course, to point to that as fictitious, right? Like, that nobody could fail to recognize the way that race has shaped American society, right? And the way that racial disparities still exist. And so I guess the question is whether and to what extent the Constitution is going to be interpreted to essentially require the government to pretend that it doesn't see those things, right? And to prevent acknowledgement of racial disparity, exclusion, segregation, problems related to race, to prevent the government from taking those into account as it designs policy. So it's been the case for some years that a more limited form of colorblindness has been adopted as legal doctrine by the Supreme Court. And specifically what they mean is as applied to what we call racial classifications. That's where the government takes race into account in deciding how to treat individual people, right? And historically, obviously for the vast majority of our history, overwhelmingly those kinds of governmental distinctions disfavored people of color, and particularly Black people, and we have the long history of slavery and Jim Crow to illustrate those points. And in more recent decades, the Supreme Court has basically argued that, well, if we think those things should be illegal, then we should at least also take a hard look, what is called strict scrutiny, a tough constitutional standard to overcome. We should take a hard look at policies like affirmative action. And justices, the more conservative justices on the court, including the Chief Justice, John Roberts, have committed themselves to this idea that taking race into account overwhelmingly, maybe not in every circumstance, but overwhelmingly tends to further the problem of racial discrimination. So in a previous case, the Chief Justice famously said that the way to stop racial discrimination is to stop discriminating based on race. And what he meant by that is just stop taking race into account. So that's sort of where the law has stood until recently. Affirmative action had actually previously been allowed by the court in university admissions, but only under pretty limited circumstances, because the court had for some decades still applied these demanding constitutional standards like strict scrutiny to affirmative action policies. And so it had said, well, it can't be quotas. It can't, you can't go too far. You can use plus factors, but you can't, you basically can't give too much weight to race in the process, and you've got to consider race-neutral alternatives to the accomplishment of your educational objectives. So that's sort of where the law stood before last week. So let me pause there.
It's a great place to pause. I didn't want to interrupt because you've laid a nice foundation. That's where it stood until last week. So we've got the rest of the hour to figure out where we go from here. Say nothing of all the questions I want to ask when we come forward based on what she's already shared with us. It's going to be a great hour. We're going to learn a lot in this hour, and I'm going to push to make it a great hour with a lot of questions about this notion of colorblindness. Our guest is law professor at the University of Chicago, Sonja B. Starr, who you're listening to right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about. Good thing we've got 3 hours. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
Hey LA, are you feeling the heat? LADWP has rebates up to $225 on new air conditioners to help you beat the heat and save money. Plus, you can sign up for Level Pay to get predictable monthly bills for easy budgeting. Stay cool. Visit LADWP.com/COOL-LA. That's LADWP.com/COOL-LA.
She's so smooth. So I'm interrupting my own shower to remind you to treat your skin like the queen she is with Olay Hyaluronic Body Wash, packed with Olay's highest level of vitamin B3 complex. It's so moisturizing that it will give you visibly smoother, head-turning skin in just 14 days. People wondering, how'd she get so smooth? Olay Hyaluronic Body Wash. Also, try Olay Hyaluronic Body Lotion.
Okay, team, line's already around the block, and we're open in 10. Yesterday, we had 3-hour wait time.
Chef Pierre's staff is a little under-seasoned.
Why is this pot not boiling yet?
An experienced sous chef is the missing ingredient in his kitchen.
What do you mean, plate or a bowl? You work at La Pasta in La Cup.
Indeed can help him hire great people fast.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. You can schedule and conduct virtual interviews all from your employer dashboard. Visit Indeed.com/credit and get $75 towards your first sponsored job. Terms and conditions apply.
Black Lives Matters turns 10, and KBLA Talk 1580 is proud to be the exclusive media partner of the People's Justice Festival. This Saturday, July 15th, 12 to 6 p.m. in Leimert Park. Come join us as we celebrate the life-saving and history-making work of Black Lives Matter to help bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. There will be live music performances, a children's village, giveaways, vendors, a healing justice space, Skillshare, and amazing speakers including Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Cornel West, live on stage at 4:30 p.m. For more information, go to blmgrassroots.org. That's www.blmgrassroots.org. Dominique DePrima and Tavis Smiley will be main stage hosts throughout the day, and the KBLA Talk 1580 delegation will be out in full force. So, join us this Saturday, July 15th, 12 to 6 p.m. in Leimert Park as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
I done plant my seeds, now I'm rooted. Brown skin popping, I'm rooted. Can pull the hood out me, I'm rooted. Rooted, nappy head, rooted.
Broadcasting live from Leimert Park, USA. Welcome back to your home for unapologetic Unapologetically Progressive Radio, KBLA Talk 1580.
We continue our conversation now about colorblindness. The battle over colorblindness has already begun, as declared by University of Chicago law professor Sonja B. Starr in a brilliant piece yesterday in the New York Times, which I wanted to interrogate today, and we're doing that right now for the rest of this hour on KBLA Talk 1580. You suggested earlier, Professor Starr, and I think you're right about, I know you're right about it, that this notion of colorblindness is a contested concept. That was your phrase, a contested concept. But it seems to me to be a great deal more than just a contested concept. It is a dangerous concept. Certainly inside the legal profession, inside our system of jurisprudence, it's not just contested. To me and to many others, it's a dangerous concept. How would you respond to that phrase?
Yeah, so I agree with that, and I especially think that the further it gets pushed, and I think there is a huge danger that a growing legal movement will try to push it very far indeed. That it poses a danger to U.S. governments at all levels, local, state, federal, and even many private actors, to their ability to address racial inequalities at all. And let me explain what I mean by that. So first, let me acknowledge that even the more limited way in which colorblindness has existed already in the Supreme Court's case law and in the case law of federal courts, even that has been powerfully critiqued by many scholars, both inside and outside the law. So, people like Michelle Alexander, for instance, critique its implications for the criminal justice system. There's all kinds of scholarship on this, the argument, and not even just scholarship, like dissenting justices of the Supreme Court have also articulated that view. I think Justice Stevens had a dissent in which he said essentially there's no reason that we should apply these demanding legal standards, strict scrutiny, to efforts to help to close racial gaps, to make America more racially equal, because the whole point of having that strict standard is to make sure that the vision of equality that the 14th Amendment, the Reconstruction Amendments stand for, is brought into reality, right? And we should not think the same way about policies that seek to subordinate people by race, like Jim Crow, as we do to policies that intend to provide opportunity for people who have been traditionally subordinated, like affirmative action, right? And so that, in and of itself, was the pre-existing colorblindness doctrine already had a lot, had these problems baked within it, and so I do want to acknowledge that. And then maybe I should pause there before I turn to what I think the next set of dangers are.
No, we'll come to that next set of dangers. Trust me. We got time to do that. But I want to inject right now, given what you just said a moment ago about the Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts and Clarence Thomas and others in that 6-3 majority, who believe that the way to deal with race discrimination is to not discriminate on race. All right, nice turn of phrase. I like it. It's cute. But I'm trying to juxtapose that notion against that advanced many years ago by Justice Louis Brandeis, who suggested the exact opposite, that you cannot, and I'm paraphrasing here, you know exactly the quote I'm referencing, that you can't address race without first taking consideration of race. You can't address it without acknowledging it, if I can say it, and taking consideration of it. So obviously, and this is no surprise here, inside of our own U.S. Supreme Court, there is this divide, this political divide, I might add, over how to deal with this notion of colorblindness. And I wonder if you might speak to that dichotomy inside the court itself, not just recently, but over a period of years.
Yeah, I think that dissenting justices have so the colorblindness view of this has held the majority for some time, with the exception of university level affirmative action. But there have been powerful dissents for a long time, and the dissent last week by Justice Jackson is a current example of.
And by the way,
really
not to jump in, but I will for just a second. Forgive me. By the way, it was brilliant. I have rarely. I mean, she's the newest justice on the court, of course. But her dissent, Sonja Sotomayor's, was brilliant. But that dissent by KBJ, I told our audience last week, I think it was, that you have to read it. You have to read her dissent last week. Her writing is brilliant. Her reasoning is brilliant. Dissents, as you well know, as a law professor, do in fact matter. I just want to interject there. If you have not read the dissent by KBJ in this affirmative action case, please Google it, find it, do yourself a favor, take a few minutes to read that dissent. Carry on, Professor Starr. I'm sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, and I think she powerfully kind of gives the lie to the idea that, you know, America can somehow consider itself to be past racial inequality. And I think that for advocates of the colorblindness movement, that's what they want to believe, right? That this is a historical phenomenon that maybe pops up in kind of narrow circumstances, as opposed to something that has really structured the modern opportunities of people today, right? And she goes through history, both of racial disparity in America and of the 14th Amendment, to make that case. So that's so let me just talk about the way in which last week's decision changed the law, and then the next wave of cases that I am worried about. So the way last week's decision changed the law was essentially to get rid of this affirmative action exception, at least in the context of university admission. So the case involved Harvard College and UNC, and you know, they had affirmative action programs that in many ways are similar to those used by other elite universities, and they articulated reasons for them in terms of the educational benefits of diversity. And basically the court said, well, you know, we're not even going to really get to the application of strict scrutiny here, because we don't think you've articulated interests, those diversity interests are too amorphous to allow us to even meaningfully evaluate whether you've tailored your policy to them. And so they basically just reject the importance, or at least they say it's commendable goals, but not coherent enough, basically. And so they basically decline to take seriously those educational benefits of diversity. And as a result, the affirmative action policies of both colleges fall. And, you know, everybody, I think, believes that, with possibly limited exceptions like the service academies, which they might treat differently, that will apply very broadly across the educational landscape. There will soon be litigation applying it probably to affirmative action in hiring. And so in general, this was a huge blow to affirmative action. The next wave of cases that I'm concerned with go beyond extending the colorblindness principle to bar affirmative action. And instead, they want to realize a much more radical vision, even than that, of colorblindness, in which you have a government that is basically blind to, that is you know, truly pretending to be blind to racial disparity and declining to address it with any policy tools at all. So let me explain what this next line of cases is. So in affirmative action cases, while this affirmative action case has been pending, there's been lots of discussion about, well, so if affirmative action gets struck down, what will universities do to try to maintain diversity on campus, right? I think that conversation is happening very much in public media, in the public conversation, and I'm sure that it's happening behind closed doors in admissions offices, right? They are worried that affirmative action has been an important tool to providing opportunities for promising students which race-blind criteria may have overlooked, right? And so they want to be able to. They still believe in the educational benefits of diversity, though, and want to try to preserve them in other ways. And affirmative action has been an important tool, but it's never been the only tool that schools use to try to preserve diversity, right? You can think of financial aid as a tool, right? Because it provides opportunities for people who can't afford college. You can think of targeted recruiting, right, as an important tool, and also just the things like giving a preference for poor kids or for kids who have overcome various other dimensions of diversity, or geographic preferences. So an important historical example of this is the Texas 10% plan, which was adopted when a local federal court in Texas struck down the University of Texas's affirmative action policy. This was more than 20 years ago now. They adopted this plan to allow the top 10% of students by grades in each high school to have access to the University of Texas, right? And the idea is that geography intersects so strongly with race, right? We have housing segregation and very different racial compositions of different communities. And so if you provide an opportunity for people to come to a school that cuts across different geographies, that will have the effect of increasing racial diversity on campus. So, and then even things like the debate about what weight, if any, to give to standardized tests, whether to require them, whether to take them into account even optionally, whether to give them weight in the process relative to grades, or weight given to other criteria like athletic participation, et cetera. All of those things have potential effects on diversity, and so I think it's been common, and I think will be increasingly important in the absence of affirmative action, for universities to be taking that into taking diversity questions into account when they're making all these other policy choices that are themselves not about race, right? Like they're not about using race in the process, but they have impacts because we know in our society that socioeconomics and geography are strongly correlated with race, right?
So what most concerns you? What are you most afraid of? I've got 90 seconds. We'll continue on the other side of news, traffic, and so on. But what most concerns you about this next wave of cases as you framed it?
So the next wave of cases are going to fight schools' ability to do that. We're going to see these cases at the university level, and we're already seeing them at the high school level because high schools, some high schools are competitive, even public high schools, magnet schools, and those many of those schools, they don't use affirmative action, but they do use some of these other tools, and they're already getting sued. And these cases stand for a much broader principle, which would be, I think, more dangerous, which is the idea that even using race-neutral tools, schools can't do anything to promote diversity, and that principle would have an impact even beyond education. It would affect all kinds of policy.
So when we come forward after news, traffic, and sports, I want to come right back to that point. These legal challenges forthcoming vis-a-vis admissions policies at these high schools and colleges that seek racial diversity through race-neutral measures. Even that is going to be under attack. That's the point that Professor Starr is making. They don't want affirmative action. They don't even want race-neutral measures. How does that work? We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about this notion of these legal conniptions, as it were, that we are going through to try to pretend as if we are colorblind. There's a lot to unpack there, so just put a pin in that for the moment. We'll continue with Sonja B. Starr, professor of law at University of Chicago, when we come forward after news, traffic, and sports on KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to Tavis Smiley, recipient of the prestigious Freedom of Speech Award at Talkers 2023. More of Tavis when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The Biden administration is defending its decision to supply Ukraine with controversial cluster munitions. In an interview with MSNBC, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Ukraine would be defenseless without the weapons. That's because he says traditional weapon stockpiles have been depleted. Many NATO allies have signed an agreement banning the use, production, and sale of cluster munitions due to the risks to civilians. The city of Detroit, Michigan is mourning the loss of former city councilwoman African-American Reverend Dr. Joanne Watson. Watson was the first woman executive director of the Detroit NAACP and a former delegate to the 2001 United National World Conference Against Racism. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Troubles in Boyle Heights on the 60 westbound before the 5 with a wreck in the right lane. Several vehicles involved there and traffic's jamming up at Downey Road. 710 northbound drive is stopped from Atlantic Bandini up to 3rd Street. And in Carson, 405 northbound at Main Street, a work zone has the off-ramp closed. Traffic's jamming up from Carson Street.
Bank of America has powerful digital solutions for local and global businesses, so you can make every move matter. Visit bankofamerica.com/banking for business to learn more. Bank of America, N.A. Copyright 2023.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
Chris Eubanks has two very important distinctions attached to his name. He's only the third Black American male tennis player to reach the quarterfinals at Wimbledon. He's also the only American male left on the Wimbledon bracket. Eubanks, who grew up in Atlanta, continues his push towards history tonight. He faces Daniil Medvedev of Russia in the quarterfinals. Only two other Black American males made it to the Wimbledon quarterfinals. The legendary Arthur Ashe did it in 1968, 1969, and 1975. Malachi Washington made it in 1996. The Dodgers will have three starters in tonight's Major League Baseball All-Star game in Seattle. Right fielder Mookie Betts, first baseman Freddie Freeman, and designated hitter J.D. Martinez. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Maisha Cairo here with a quick recap from my time at JP Morgan Chase's Advancing Black Wealth Tour. There were speakers Ian Dunlap, Damon John, Lynn Richardson, MC Light, Don Kennedy, to name a few. Take a listen to what Justin Grant, Community Development Lead at Chase's Advancing Black Pathway, let's see what he had to say.
So I'm Justin Grant. I lead community development and national partnerships for JP Morgan Chase's Advancing Black Pathway strategy. And so we're focused on strengthening the economic foundation of Black communities, and we're making targeted investments in programs like the Advancing Black Wealth Tour to help us get our tools and resources out to the community to drive sustained impact over time.
So when it comes to Black and brown people, it sounds like Chase is making it their personal responsibility not only to facilitate these events, but to educate and provide resources. So, Mr. Grant, I have to ask, what does wealth building look like for the individual?
It's home ownership, it's having that freedom to be able to start your own business and create jobs in your community, and it's having that long-term plan towards retirement requirement, having that vision for what you want your life to be, and you have the resources to actually live it.
I'm Aisha Cairo. Thanks for sticking around. That was my recap from Chase's Advancing Black Wealth Tour. First stop was here in LA, and they're taking it national.
Are you looking to steer your career in a new direction? Driving for Culver City Bus can be your ticket to a long-lasting career with excellent benefits and paid training. Culver City Bus is looking for customer service and safety-minded bus operators to join the growing team. Culver City Bus offers on-the-job training starting at $19.10 per hour, uniform allowance, and health benefits. Culver City Bus is a great employer. Let Culver City Bus connect you with an essential service job. If you enjoy driving, seek real opportunities for career advancement, and passionate about making a difference in the community, then you are invited to join the Culver City Bus team. Start your journey today by submitting an application at culvercity.org/jobs. For more info, visit culvercitybus.com or call live customer service operators at 310-253-6500.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where hate meets a scholarly match.
I'm Tavis Smiley. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Glad to have you with us in this conversation that we continue now with Sonja B. Starr, professor of law at the University of Chicago. We're talking about a brilliant piece, provocative piece she wrote yesterday, authored for the New York Times, called "The Next Battle Over Colorblindness Has Begun." And just before the break, we were starting to work our way toward what that next wave of cases looks like. And one of the things that we're going to be battling in the months and years to come, now that they've done away with affirmative action in college admissions, I said this last week, they won't stop there. It starts with college admissions, and next it'll be contracting, next it'll be employment, and on and on and on the list will go until they do away with any sort of corrective policy that ushers people of color and others who've been disavowed into the room. Talented you have to be, but these corrective programs at least usher you into the space of proving yourself. And so they start with affirmative action in education, as I said a moment ago. They won't stop until they attack it in every aspect of our lives. That said, Professor Starr was making the point that part of what we're going to get in this next wave of attack on these corrective programs like affirmative action is an attack on institutions that seek racial diversity through race-neutral measures. So it's one thing to not want affirmative action. It's another thing to not want racial diversity through even race-neutral measures, Professor Starr.
Yeah, so let me talk about an example of this next wave of litigation. So the most prominent case right now, and the one that, if this issue goes very quickly to the Supreme Court, the case most likely to take it to the Supreme Court, is a case called Coalition for TJ. Versus the Fairfax County School Board. Fairfax County is a county in Northern Virginia near D.C. And TJ stands for Thomas Jefferson. The Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology happens to be the high school that I went to, and that's what brought me to begin working on this. That gave me a special interest in these cases, and I've been working on them from a scholarly perspective for a while now. This case, Coalition for TJ, is a challenge to the admissions policy of a competitive high school. It's a magnet school. It is one of the top schools in the country. And so, people really want slots at this school, and the politics, including the racial politics in Northern Virginia surrounding it, have become hotly contested. So for decades, there was controversy about how few Black and Hispanic students were admitted to TJ. And just to give a sense, historically, prior to 2020, for a number of years, TJ's entering class had been about 1% to 2% Black, whereas the county's about 10% Black. And it had been about maybe 3%, varying a little bit from year to year, 3% Hispanic, whereas the county's 27% Hispanic. In recent years, the school had had a substantial Asian American majority, and so we see this situation similar to what we saw in the college level affirmative action cases, in which Asian American plaintiffs are the ones who are challenging racial diversity policies. Although I should say that the steps that TJ ended up taking to promote racial diversity enjoyed the support of a very large fraction of the Asian American community at TJ and in Northern Virginia. But there were some people that were upset. So let me say what TJ did. So in 2020, as I'm sure all of your listeners know, there was a lot of political pressure to start taking seriously racial disparity issues that a lot of institutions had sort of been letting slide for a long time. And the Fairfax County School Board became particularly embarrassed by released numbers that summer that showed that the incoming class for TJ, which is like the crown jewel of its school system, had a number of black students that was just reported as too small to report. And the number of Hispanic students was also very low. And finally, after facing this issue for some time, but not really doing much about it, the school board held meetings that were intended to address the issue. And so they were also looking at other issues like the underrepresentation of poor kids at TJ. It wasn't just about race, but they were not hiding the fact that a concern for racial diversity was part of the motive for why they decided to reform TJ admissions. Okay. And here's what they did. So first, they shifted away from a standardized test to a grades-based admissions policy. Grades had always, of course, been part of admissions, but there used to be a high-stakes test, and they got rid of it. Then when evaluating students based on grades, they created some, they basically reserved some slots, kind of like the University of Texas had done with its 10% plan. They reserved some slots for students from each middle school in the county. And so that was essentially like a form of geographic affirmative action, making sure that less represented neighborhoods had students there. And they gave a plus factor for poor kids, students on the free and reduced price lunch program. And a couple other things, English language learners got a plus factor, and they also increased the class size, which really sort of should have softened the impact for everybody. It creates a bigger pie, more room for people of
what happened?
All races.
But what happened?
Okay, so the policy when the first year's admissions came out, the policy was basically modestly effective at increasing Black and Hispanic representation. Didn't bring it to anywhere close to their shares of the county, but did increase it quite a bit over what it was before. And also, by the way, was wildly successful at improving the representation of poor kids, which went from something like 1% to 2% to 25% of the class. Then they got sued. They got sued by an organization called the Coalition for TJ, which was basically aggrieved parents, who argued that the policy was discrimination against Asian Americans. And they were pretty careful in how they made this argument. They didn't claim what lawyers call anti-Asian animus. Like, they didn't claim that the school board had a problem with Asian people, right? Instead, they made this argument that there's a zero-sum trade-off in admissions. And since Asian Americans were the majority of TJ's class, it was obvious that if to the extent that you increased representation of Black and Hispanic students, the Asian American share was going to go down somewhat. That's sort of just math. And they argued that the fact that that's just math meant that you can't really differentiate the aim of helping Black and Hispanic students gain representation from a desire to reduce Asian representation. And so they said basically the mere fact that it's trying to promote racial diversity should be seen as discrimination against Asian Americans.
So
that's the legal theory of the case.
I got it. Let me pause there for a second, because this is the rub, right? This is the rub, that even when you advance race neutral measures, you still are subjected to lawsuits. And to your point, this is one of those cases that's making its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. I remind this audience oftentimes that the U.S. Supreme Court chooses the cases it wants to hear. That's why I can guarantee you that the fight to gut these corrective programs ain't over. It won't stop with admissions. It'll be contracting, employment, and beyond, as I said earlier, because they get to choose the cases they want to hear. What do you bet? Just take a wild guess what the options are, what the optics are, and what the chances are that the Supreme Court will choose this case to hear. I digress for the moment. We'll continue when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward.
To my hometown, my community. Some of you have known me my whole life. Do you notice anything different about the kids in the neighborhood? Ever paid attention? We might start with gifts, money, attention. These are signs. Child trafficking is happening right here in this town. So don't just watch through the window. Pay attention. Because the more we know, the more we'll all know to say no. Learn the signs to look for and how to help at no-to-say-no.com.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Ray Richardson, your sports connection here at KBLA Talk 1580. Join me and my co-host Neil Scarborough every Saturday night at 7 for Out of Bounds, the show that brings some flavor to the world of sports for 60 minutes. We take you beyond the scores and press conferences. We give you our point of view, the way Black folks see what's going down. You can join the conversation and give us your analysis at 1-800-920-1580. Out of Bounds every Saturday night at 7 on KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
You like your style, bro?
Hollywood Walk of Fame stars in 2024. Stay tuned to find out who's in next year's class. I'm Aisha Cairo with your K-Black Minute News. A new group of 31 entertainment professionals across film, television, radio, recording, and sports entertainment will have their names etched into Hollywood's history in 2024. One of the most celebrated names on the list was the beloved Chadwick Boseman. Others for the class of 2024 in Hollywood Walk of Fame was this year's Oscar winner Michelle Yeoh in the motion picture category. Other notable names include Chris Pine, Gwen Stefani, Andre, Dr. Dre, Young, Otis Redding, Christina Ricci, Brandy Norwood, Harry Washington, and more. The dates for the star ceremonies have not yet been scheduled. To find out all 31 inductees, visit youtube.com/Walk of Fame.
You're listening to K-Drip, where we play all the best classic water-wasting hits like watering your lawn during the hottest time of the day and leaky faucets. They're tunes from another time because now that we face a hotter, drier future, every drop counts. Despite an extremely wet winter, keep using less water, fixing leaks, and reusing indoor water for your garden. Visit SaveOurWater.com for more ways to conserve. Up next, brushing your teeth with the water on. K-Drip.
Let's unpack a little bit more with Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues right now.
Professor Starr, if they don't want affirmative action and they don't want race-neutral measures, then what?
Well, I mean, I think that then what is the vision that the plaintiffs in this case have, and their lawyers who have also brought similar cases in several other school districts, is for a sort of fantastical vision of a colorblind America in which race just doesn't count in government policy. And I think that I want to say, by the way, you posed a question right before the break. Is the Supreme Court going to take this case? I don't know if they're going to. I actually think there's this case, the theory in this case goes very far beyond even what they did last week. And I don't know if there are enough justices that want to go that far. I'm quite sure Justice Kavanaugh doesn't, because in his concurrence, he talked about it being okay for government to, and schools specifically, to try to promote diversity through race-neutral means. But that still leaves 5 of the justices in the majority that didn't join Justice Kavanaugh in making that statement. And so where all 5 of them stand, I think, is, I could talk about each of them individually, but basically we don't know how many votes there are to go as far as the plaintiffs want to go in these next wave of cases. Yep. Where the plaintiffs want to go is very far indeed, and I don't think we should expect it to stop at education. I think that so just to be clear, this school, TJ, in their current policy, just like under their old policy, admissions officers don't have information about the race of the applicants, right? They are not taking race into account in any way whatsoever. It's just that the school board, when it decided, we're going to give weight to grades instead of test scores, we're going to take socioeconomic disadvantage into account, those decisions, which are not decisions to take race into account, those decisions itself were made with awareness of their potential for improving racial diversity. If that's illegal, right, so that would go way beyond what the court has said already. What the court has said already is at an individual level, you shouldn't take race into account. But what they want to say is that the goal of reducing racial inequality and the goal of promoting diversity, that those themselves are bad goals. They're unconstitutional goals. And if that's true, then it's hard to see how that logic stops at education or even at diversity, right? It could also extend to goals of reducing other kinds of racial disparities in society, like economic disparities, employment disparities, wealth disparities, health disparities, like the big gap in maternal mortality, for example. Sure. Those kinds of disparities motivate a wide variety of government policies that are not race-related, right? So that is that they don't take race into account. But it's like if you adopt, say, a jobs program and you place the locations for where the job training program is in neighborhoods, in say, maybe black neighborhoods with relatively low employment rates. And the programs themselves don't discriminate based on race, but they did have the goal of closing race gaps in employment and in mind when they adopt a policy. That might be problematic. Or like policies to try to reduce that maternal mortality gap. Those might be problematic under this plaintiff's theory.
No, I think your use of the word problematic is charitable, generous, and kind. I digress. We'll continue with our remaining moments with Sonja B. Starr when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
The station you turn to when you've had it up to here with cultural incompetence. KBLA Talk 1580.
Have you heard about Lendistry? Lendistry is a national Black-led small business lender that is headquartered right here in LA. Once you've started your business, Lendistry provides flexible financing options starting at $50,000 to help you access the affordable capital needed to grow. Whether financing is needed to increase working capital, acquire a business, purchase inventory and equipment, or refinance debt, Lendistry has a solution for you. Lending products range from traditional business term loans and non-revolving lines of credit to SBA 7A loans and commercial real estate financing. Lendistry's pre-application process is simple and does not impact your credit score. Visit lendistry.com/KBLA to learn more and to get started with an application right from the website.
Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is killing people. It's a powerful opioid, often made illegally and commonly mixed with illicit drugs. It can even be pressed into counterfeit pills that resemble prescription medications. Just 2 milligrams, about the size of a few grains of sand, can potentially be lethal. This isn't an ad to scare you, but it is an ad to make you think twice. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com. This message is brought to you by the Ad Council.
This is a special alert to all Americans who own a vehicle with less than 200,000 miles, with an auto warranty about to expire, or with no warranty coverage at all. Due to a decline in the economy, CarShield is announcing a low-cost, month-to-month vehicle protection plan that is now available to the public to save any driver out-of-pocket expenses on future auto repairs. Call now to find out how you can pay almost nothing for covered auto repairs. Yes, you heard that correctly. Pay almost nothing for covered auto repairs. An open phone line has been established for all drivers to call for a free quick quote. Call 800-381-8528 now. Drivers who are covered will not have to pay for covered repairs again. This protection plan is at an all-time low. Additionally, drivers who activate this vehicle protection today will also receive free roadside assistance, free towing, and car rental options at no additional cost. Call us for your free quick quote today. 800-381-8528. That's 800-381-8528. What do you have to lose? Call 800-381-8528. Again, 800-381-8528.
Conversations that matter. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
I've got just a few minutes left in this conversation. We lose Professor Starr, and this program ends, for that matter, at the top of the hour, about 3 minutes from now. So let me offer this as, I think, the exit question, which is, as a professor of law, University of Chicago, what do you make of the ways that we are essentially turning legal flips, if I can put it that way, to advance this notion of colorblindness, which is, to my mind, a joke to begin with. But what do you make of the legal conniptions that we're going through to try to make this stick, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the theory that these plaintiffs want to push in these new cases, which you could see as advocating something like total colorblindness, right? Government shouldn't even consider race in any way, even with race-neutral tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that theory, what it depends on is taking a theory that grew out of traditional civil rights litigation, this idea that sometimes the government does things that look race-neutral on its face, but it's for a purpose to subordinate people based on race, right? That's an important principle in traditional civil rights litigation, right? We don't necessarily want to trust that what the government says is its motive really is its motive all the time. But they want to turn that to the context of something that I think Americans across the political spectrum have taken for granted for many years, which is that it's okay for government. I think we've largely taken for granted, and even like Republican presidents, and this is not a partisan issue. People have taken for granted that it's a legitimate goal for government to try to reduce racial disparity, right? For government to try to promote diversity. And these cases seek to undermine that consensus by taking this principle from one context where it's been important, right, from this traditional civil rights principle, and flipping it on its head, right? That's their vision of colorblindness. They say, the law has to apply in a mirror image form, no matter whether the policy is trying to promote racial equality or reduce it. Either way, if government's thinking about race, that's a problem,
Yep.
right? And that I think is a very radical and dangerous principle that would effectively lock racial disparities into place by preventing government from having any tools to address them.
So here's the real exit question in 45 seconds. I was going to ask whether or not you think we'll ever be successful at this, and that's not the right question. The question is whether or not you think America truly cares about balancing equality and diversity.
I think that America is too diverse to generalize about in that way, right? I think that our society is riven by a lot of disagreement on this issue. But I am hoping that most of America at least won't want to go this far, and that even the current Supreme Court won't want to go this far. But I am worried, and we're going to see what happens.
I am hoping as well, but I'm not holding my breath. Her piece in the New York Times yesterday, which caused this conversation to come your way today in this hour, is called The next battle over colorblindness has begun. You can find it at the New York Times. The next battle over colorblindness has begun, authored by Sonja B. Starr, law professor at University of Chicago. Professor Starr, good to have you on. Thank you for the piece. Thank you for your insights. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks so much.
Great to have you. That's our show for today. Back tomorrow morning, Lord willing, to do it all over again. Time now to make room for the KBLA Midday Money Chain. Up next, the Millionaires Roundtable with Lynn Richardson, followed by Ahead of the Crypto Curve with Najee Roberts. Old money, new money. Either way, we got you covered here on KBLA Talk 1580. Until tomorrow morning, thanks for tuning in. And as always, keep the faith.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. A grand jury is set to decide whether former President Trump should be charged for his alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election.